In late August of 1889, the San Francisco waterfront shivered under a series of low, grinding tremors that rattled windows but left buildings standing. The ground itself was restless. By dawn on August 29, a long fracture split a vacant lot near Market and First Street, exhaling cold air and the smell of wet clay. A crowd gathered at the edge of the break before the sun cleared the rooftops. Charles H. Johnson, a staff reporter for the San Francisco Call, stood among the onlookers with his notebook open. He watched surveyors unspool their measuring chains and lower oil lanterns into the dark. What they found below was not loose fill or washed-out soil. Johnson filed his dispatch that afternoon, preserving a precise description for the official record. He described a regular street pavement with granite curbs and cut stone blocks, lying at a depth of not less than 60 feet. The earth had cracked to reveal an engineered street that predated the American claim on the bay. The stones sat bedded in lime mortar. The curb lines were dressed with straight chisels. Men on the rim argued over elevation and grade, preparing to document a complete intersection. The assumption of open study lasted exactly 5 hours. By early evening, a dark carriage arrived at the lot boundary. Theodore G. Brown, the city engineer, stepped onto the packed dirt. He did not ask for lanterns or ropes. He turned to the nearest patrolman and ordered the perimeter secured and cleared. The measuring tape was rolled away. The crowd was pushed back beyond the lot line. The trench was flagged for immediate closure, long before any independent survey could begin. Why move that fast to seal what the earth had just opened up to us? The police line held the public back, but the official work continued under strict supervision. Brown ordered his survey team to make the descent. Thick hemp lines were secured to iron bollards driven into the lot edge, and brass lanterns hissed as they were lowered into the damp throat of the fracture. 2 men stepped onto the buried surface. They carried calibrated steel tapes, brass transit levels, and elevation markers. They anchored the line against the modern grade and lowered a plumb bob until it struck stone. The exposed roadway measured precisely 20 feet between its granite boundaries. The curbstones sat flush and unyielding, locked in position by a cured bed of hydraulic lime mortar. Crew supervisors chipped a small fragment for later analysis. The sample revealed a pale grey matrix with no traces of 19th century Portland cement. It held a specific ratio of slate lime and crushed pumice that cured to the hardness of fired clay. The paving stones themselves were laid in a tight herringbone lattice. Each block was cut to identical dimensions, fitted to distribute heavy cart traffic across the entire pavement bed without settling. Johnson returned on September 2nd. His article for the San Francisco Call expanded the scope beyond the trench floor. He documented that the exposed fracture walls revealed the lower foundation courses of a substantial stone structure running parallel to the curb line. The blocks were fully squared and dressed with iron tools, showing right angles and parallel faces that spoke of standardized templates rather than colonial handwork. The alignment suggested an entire street grid waiting to intersect beneath the wooden sidewalks and coal slag of the modern thoroughfare. The municipal survey clerk filed the data that afternoon. He logged the exact geographic coordinates into the lot registry, cross-referencing the latitude and longitude with the original 1851 city plat. The numbers aligned perfectly. The placement was deliberate. The official record was stamped and bound. By September 4th, the rhythm shifted without warning. Only 7 days after the initial rupture, heavy freight wagons began backing onto the vacant parcel in continuous rotation. Crews operating under direct city contracts worked in shifts, tipping loads of broken basalt, fired brick dust, and packed bay mud directly into the crack. The material hit stone with a heavy thud. The lantern light vanished beneath the rising fill. The survey markers were pulled from the earth. The weekly expenditure ledger from the Department of Public Works recorded a single administrative line: fill material, Market Street fissure. No structural engineer signed off on the necessity. No city supervisor requested the closure. A documented intersection, mapped by multiple witnesses and measured with precision instruments, was buried under tons of municipal debris in less than a week. Why rush to seal a foundation that predates the gold rush? What damage does a paved street cause to a city that claims to have none before it? The speed of the burial answers itself. They were not stabilizing the ground, they were erasing a timeline. The 1889 closure on Market Street was not an anomaly. It was a standing procedure. The municipal archives hold a quiet record of identical ruptures spanning decades and crossing the bay. In late October of 1857, a heavy winter landslide sheared through the clay slopes of Telegraph Hill. Survey crews mapping the slide documented a continuous paved surface lying 40 feet below the exposed face. The stones were rounded and tight, laid in patterns resembling later Mexican roadways. Yet the undisturbed sediment layers above them predated the first Spanish mission bells by centuries. City engineers sketched the alignment, noted the lime mortar composition, and ordered the gully filled before the field notes could be filed. 11 years later, the Great Quake of 1868 cracked the eastern shoreline near Lake Merritt. A county surveyor submitted a report in November, noting a fractured foundation wall of interlocking basalt blocks, cut with mechanical precision, resting 50 feet beneath the marsh soil. The blocks were photographed for the official registry. The plate glass negative vanished from the county vaults within 12 months. The slope was regraded without further notation. In April of 1906, the ground tore open along the Van Ness Avenue corridor. Emergency crews uncovered a stone channel at a depth of 50 feet, engineered like a municipal aqueduct, its trough smoothed by generations of channeled water. The fire department logs make no mention of pre-modern infrastructure. They record only the rapid deployment of fill teams to stabilize the corridor for heavy wagon traffic. The channel was covered before sunset. The sequence repeats without variation across 3 generations. The earth opens, the engineered stones appear. The coordinates are logged, the fracture is sealed. The official plats recognize only the 1847 coastal survey and the frantic expansion following the 1849 gold strike. There are no strata lines on public maps for what sleeps beneath. Yet the physical evidence shows a uniform depth, a consistent grade, and a grid that follows engineered geometry rather than natural topography. A frontier settlement does not lay granite curbs 60 feet down. A mining camp does not pave intersections with dressed stone before drafting its own charter. The approved history demands a blank canvas. The excavated record shows a completed city. What happens to a municipality when the timeline requires it was always new. You remove the stone, you dump the fill, you publish a clean map. The layers are not scattered debris, they are aligned foundations resting in parallel beneath a curated past. The methodical burial answers a single question. What was here is irrelevant to what they wanted built. The soil conceals the contradiction, and the ledgers stay silent. The granite curbs lowered into the 1889 fissure did not belong to the Spanish Presidio. They did not match the rough adobe foundations of the Mexican period, nor the timber and brick of the early American boomtown. The chisel marks on the face of those stones ran parallel and precise, spaced with a mechanical regularity that required templates and iron tools unknown to California before the gold rush. The lime mortar binding them held a density that modern laboratory tests confirm matches no documented 19th century mixture. That material rests 60 feet beneath the present sidewalk. The rubble and packed mud ordered by Theodore Brown still sit above it, compacted by a century of heavy wagons, electric streetcars, and diesel traffic. In the late 1930s, as engineers surveyed the right-of-way for a new rapid transit corridor beneath Market Street, seismic reflection equipment mapped a dense geometric mass at exactly 60 feet of depth. The anomaly formed a perfect rectangle. Its edges aligned with the original survey coordinates Brown had temporarily marked before the closure. The Transit Authority filed a brief technical report recommending a route adjustment of several hundred feet to avoid the obstruction. The recommendation was approved without debate. No core drilling was scheduled. No historical review was requested. The tunnel path was simply shifted. A few years after the Great Fire, municipal building codes were rewritten to mandate pile foundations that reached past the unstable upper fill and anchored deep into the subsoil. The revised statutes never stated what those piles were meant to bypass. The regulations simply appeared, drafted and enacted by committees that kept no public record of their site inspections. The stone is real. The grid is real. The decision to cover it was deliberate. The question is not whether predecessors existed under the bay. The stratigraphy and the mortar and the map tunnels answer that. The question rests on the silence. What force shattered a city built with dressed stone and hydraulic lime so completely that only the deepest courses survived? What compels each new generation to treat every seismic exposure as a safety hazard rather than a historical record? Why does the official timeline treat deep foundations as modern engineering solutions instead of acknowledgements of a buried structural layer? The engineers divert the tunnel. The codes mandate depth without naming the obstacle. The maps show only the 19th century grid, because that is the only grid they are permitted to draft. The 1889 trench remains sealed beneath Market Street. It lies under the asphalt and the steel rails and the steady rhythm of footsteps crossing the intersection every hour of every day. It waits in the dark. It will wait until the ground moves again and forces another opening.